Welcome back, everyone. The federal government has ordered the Transmission Company of Nigeria and all other relevant agencies of the ministry to begin the immediate implementation of the recommendations of the Interagency Committee set up to address the in-season grid collapses in the power sector. Minister for Power, Adebayo Adelabu, gave the margin order in a statement by his special advisor on strategic communications and media, Bolaji Tunji. Before now, the minister had set up a committee to address the in-season grid collapses. The minister says the committee recommended an audit and testing of existing equipment and improvements in the maintenance of the transmission equipment and lines. The committee called for significant investment from the government and the private sector. The committee also recommended the development of a framework and to adopt reliability-centered maintenance. This is as the TCN appealed for understanding among Nigerians on the possibilities of intermittent disruptions as repair work begins on the grid. So tonight, let's speak with the Professor of Energy and Electricity Law, University of Lagos, Professor Yemi Oke, on this latest development and the overall assessment of the power sector. Prof, good evening to you. Thank you so much for joining us tonight on Politics Tonight. Thank you.
Good evening, and thanks for having me.
Right. So I want us to begin this conversation with an assessment of the power sector in Nigeria. How will you assess it?
Your guess is as good as mine. We're still struggling with the power situation in the country, obviously. And I think we started a journey that should, all things being equal, lead us somewhere in the power sector with the series of efforts being taken by the current administration. And that's, of course, dates back to the new regime of the Electricity Act of 2023 as against the Electric Power Sector Reform Act of 2005 that didn't get tossed anywhere, despite claiming for the repeal of that piece of legislation. You can see a new regime that tries to decentralize the entire structure in the power sector, both the generation, transmission, and distribution. Of course, you see a trend that now allows state governments now to generate, transmit, and distribute in respect of areas covered by the national grid, as well as areas not covered by a national grid. And you see a transition now that some states have started responding to the new legal regime. I don't want to mention particular states. Of course, states have started putting together their legal and regulatory framework to respond to the new trend in the power sector. Of course, I want to single out Lagos State, where I thought began years back. Lagos State now has issued RFP, of course, request for proposals for serious investment in the power sector, both generation, transmission, and distribution. Those are trends in the right direction as against excessively nationalized project that we have. And again, you see a kind of trend of Nigerians trying to go upgrade. It might not be obvious for now, but you see a lot of Nigerians going up the national grid. A number of homes have nothing to do with the national grid. A number of offices have nothing absolutely to do with the national grid. So this issue of grid collapse and what have you doesn't affect them. And we're going to see increasing trend of upgrades advocacy in the country. We've seen some states, strategic investors pushing an agenda for extensive solarization. You've seen an attempt to amass megawatts from every source and all sources. This wasn't happening before, and you've seen a kind of trend at the level of the federal government to try to get things done differently. Now the Transmission Company of Nigeria is now being restructured to the extent that we have independent system of grid or different from the transmission activities. By and large, a lot of things have started happening, and so we're still having those challenges relating to grid collapses, inefficiency in the collection regime of the discos, and the GENCOs. I mean, they're being paid the money being owed to them. A lot of things are happening, but it takes a while. An average Nigerian wouldn't believe in the efforts. They want results. How many megawatts are we generating? The country is still oscillating around 4,000 less megawatts, which is not good enough. But then,
absolutely.
realistically, started seeing the trends.
But really, Prof, I mean, it was as bad as the national grid collapsing twice this week, throwing several cities and regions into darkness. And Nigerians have consistently asked for the reason behind this. And Minister Adilabu says the national grid is over 50 years old with components that were weak, obsolete and dilapidated, including the lines and substations, with old transformers as well. He says most of the towers installed on the system a long time ago were falling due to the effect of weather and climate change, adding that they need continuous maintenance. First, do you agree with this?
Absolutely agree with it, but I'm happy that the minister is now agreeing with us because this is an advocacy that some of us, I learned it years back, saying we can't be talking of a federated grid infrastructure in the 21st century. And it took me 19 years plus to try and move in that direction. Even right from the regime of Yadra, where I say, oh, things are not done correctly, we needed to get things done differently. And I was talking about a state grid, regional grid, disaggregated grid, as you have in other countries. And the minister now, of course, is now acceding to our request in that regard. I've always been struggling with successive ministers as to what ought to be done. Initially, they might not say it. With time, they get to realize what we're saying, which is okay. Now the minister realizes the imperative of a decentralized grid. But guess what? And the world is actually going off grid. The trend globally is such that countries are going off grid. We have extensive grid disembarkation happening all over the world. So the fact that we're going, the regional grid option, state grid option is fine. I think it's a step in the right direction. But the fact that there are countries that are trying to have nothing to do with the grid. Because modern technologies wouldn't really require you to generate and transmit before it gets to the end users. Things are done remotely. Technology is responding to those requests.
Prof, an overview assessment of maintenance of power infrastructure in Nigeria. How would you say this is being done?
I'm not impressed. I'm not impressed with that. I'm not impressed with that previously because even today there was an intervention I had elsewhere where we mentioned the same advocacy. You know, when we started this whole structure, we've been having transmission issues. Who should be in charge of the National Transmission Company of Nigeria? Recall that when we had this power sector privatization or restructure or reforms, the only aspect of it that was kept was that of Transmission Company of Nigeria. Others were privatized. Then we started asking questions. What will the Nigerian government do with the transmission infrastructure because it was weak, dilapidated? And I want to recall that we have 8 megawatts that is generated, well in excess of 13,000 megawatts. We can't put those on the national grid. We can't offload those to the national grid because it is very weak. So any attempt to increase the restrictive capacity of our national grid is going to burst. And we've got a station in which some discos are rejecting load. And once is built out, it can't go back to the grid. Otherwise, the grid is going to collapse. So all these have security issues as well. So many issues. Now, what we're now saying is a situation in which we need now to focus almost extensively on off-grid solution and do rural electrification at the level of the state that wouldn't need to go to the national grid. We've started seeing trends, positive trends in that regard. It's a long journey, but I think we've started somehow.
Because according to the minister, this grid requires a lot of money to maintain. So if I'm to quote him correctly, he says, so what we have now, we will continue to manage it and prevent frequent disturbances until we're able to overhaul this infrastructure 100%. At what point must we begin this overhaul? So my question to you now, Prof, is why then must we continue to manage? I mean,
let me give you this.
Okay.
Let me give you this scenario. Years back, when they brought Manitoba Hydro International from Canada, from Manitoba region of Canada, I was against it. I told my partners, my colleagues, that nothing good will come out of Manitoba Hydro in 2012, 2013. People felt I was being, in quotes, unpatriotic. Of course, that's better patriotism for telling them the truth. I think the Nigerian government was not really ready to listen to me, and I was ready to speak up. So I wrote an article, the way we scholars would do our thing. Years back, it's all online everywhere. I chose to take the message to the Canadian government, to the Manitoba region. I wrote an article and I chose to publish the article in the University of Manitoba Law Journal, published journal globally. I published the article and the saw what I published. And the things that I predicted happened. A number of them happened within months. People felt whether I was privy to certain classified information. I said, you don't need to be a soothsayer to know the direction we are headed as a country. Now, Manitoba Hydro is gone. Money sunk. The transmission management contract between the Nigerian government and Manitoba Hydro gone down the drain. Money spent, no result achieved. Then the last administration before, the board administration started embracing cement from Germany. I said I wasn't as optimistic as to the miracles the cement of Germany was going to perform, because the facts are there. We are sector players. We are industry experts. We see things and we are patriotic enough to call yes, to say no when we need to say no, irrespective of how somebody feels out there. So I said I wasn't as optimistic. I wasn't ruling out the miracle the Siemens was going to do after the exit of Manitoba Hydro International. But I wasn't optimistic. So another colleague of mine, is Mike Iwani, spoke from a different perspective as a management expert, and I spoke differently. So we had a disagreement. At the end of the day, people felt, this is also not going to work. It wasn't going to work. Manitoba Hydro hasn't worked because we've been having challenges with the national grid, the same transmission infrastructure. Even President Tinubu went to Germany and spoke with German Chancellor about this. So years back, after the supposed miracle of Siemens, just law of Manitoba Hydro, we haven't resolved that, and we've been having grid collapses. At some point, I was predicting an average of 18, 19 grid collapses per annum. Even today, somebody said, you predicted 14 last year. And this year, it has reduced, but we have 10. Are we expecting 4 to go? I'm not a prophet of it. But I continue to speak up and tell those who care to listen the right thing. We're all in it together. I'm challenged in my homes. I'm challenged delivering services. I'm challenged teaching my students because I teach in darkness. So nobody is immune. And I always tell them, if care is not taken, the power sector of Nigeria will collapse on all of us, myself inclusive. So I guess we can do things differently. And I've seen positive signs in the current administration because things are being done differently with the massive, aggressive decentralization. Against the backdrop of the fact that this current administration has empowered local government to be able to do slightly more. And I said, if you go decentralized option, we have 774 local governments in Nigeria. Our capacity is about 3,000 plus, optimally. So if you now support the local government, each local government to generate 1 megawatts through renewable sources in 2 years, meaning in 4 years of term of an administration, a local government will be able to generate 2 megawatts. Multiply 2 megawatts in 4 years by the number of local governments we have, that will be about half of our current national capacity. Why are we not looking in that direction? And I said I wasn't going to support the idea of rural electrification because it's money for the boys. I want to be quoted. That's my view. I might be wrong. They give out solar light contracts at humongous amount of money. I don't want to quote the exact amount of money.
Prof, let's go there because it's interesting for me to hear you attest to the high cost of maintaining our national grid. And we must remind ourselves that in about a decade, Nigeria secured about 10 loans worth $4.36 billion from the World Bank over the past decade to address key challenges in its power sector. So what exactly have we been doing wrongly?
Okay, let me give you, let me land on that Rural Electrification Agency and you get the point I was making.
Okay.
The federal government set up Rural Electrification Agency and Rural Electrification Fund. Under the repeal Electric Power Sector Reform Act, I kicked against it. So I was disappointed somehow when the same Rural Electrification Agency and Rural Electrification Fund is retained under the Electricity Act of 2023. As if 12 things are still not being done correctly. What is the business of the federal government doing what will be done by local government and states in a federated setting? So, federal government will not be involved in something as mundane as street lights in rural communities. Which segment of the government is closest to the people? States. States should partner with their respective local government to start to do rural electrification off-grid, because rural electrification is off-grid. And then I said, scrap Rural Electrification Agency, the fund in the Rural Electrification Fund, distribute it to the respective states. Let's now have local government generating megawatts so that we can free up our national states and be energy secured as a country. You ask a question about the fact that we're spending money. I'm worried myself. Nigeria has spent much more in the last 10 to 15 years. Even more than that from the regime of Obasanjo. Nigeria has spent much more, humongous amount of money in a supposedly privatized power sector. Does it make sense to no one? No. Because we are saying, hey, you have privatized, but we sank a lot of money in a sector that we have publicly privatized. You see, all this now when we predicted the failure of the Gencos and Disco they were selling those assets to, people said, oh, Yemi has started again. We had our facts, and it took the Buhari administration towards the tail end of the administration to publicly acknowledge the fact that, oh, as some experts had said, he felt the privatization of the power sector was done for political reasons. Those entities that bought those things never have the financial capacity or the technical know-how to take the power sector to the next level. And we kick the guesses, but nobody listens. And all of us have solving the challenges now. And this is not, the facts out there. We've been speaking from 2002, 3, 4, up until when we had the 2005 electric power sector reform act, and the entire transition period, we were pointing out things. Those entities that bought those powers, they never had the capacity. Sadly, they approached Nigerian banks to borrow money. They mopped up the dollar in our system. Money didn't come from overseas. So they did what we call acquisition financing. They borrowed money to acquire those assets, and they didn't have money to take it to the next level. So they were now taking up money, stressing Nigerians, overtaxing Nigerians with excessive tariffs to recover. And sadly, they borrowed money when Naira to dollar was 160, 166 to a dollar. And the services they were rendering was to be rendered in Naira. So you have to do the equalization, right? Now that dollar is now 1,600 to Naira, that means they will need to jack up their tariff to equalize for them to break even. That is why most of the discos are technically insolvent. Out of 100, 96 of the entirety of the Nigerian distribution companies are technically insolvent. And we predicted, including your studios, that the exposure the Nigerian banks had to the power sector was going to take them down. So 5 banks was what we predicted was going to go down the drain. 3 other banks already went with power sector exposure. And we predicted. Those are in YouTube videos. Across the stations we've intervened. Nobody listened, but 3 banks went down. 1 is in comatose. And the discos are still technically insolvent. And somebody expects electricity in Nigeria. So we've done things wrongly, and now we must start to do things correctly. And we started. Honestly, I've started seeing signs, positive signs of the current administration. And that's logical. Here is an administration that first started what we've been advocating, the Enron thing, in 1999-2000. And I've always argued, if we had been patriotic as a country and reasonable, and we had allowed Enron project to see the light of day, as far back as 2000 when it was initiated. By now, in 2024, most, if not all states in Nigeria will have been off national grid and will have been self-sufficient in power generation. When we deploy political strength to muzzle that project years after, Nigeria is not going back to what we initiated years coming. You know, so when you look so much and you see the trend your country is headed, you are saddened. Honestly, you are depressed. But as I said, power sector is going to collapse on all of us if nothing is done, myself inclusive. But I think if you sustain the current trend, current effort, things will be done correctly. And again, the regulator need to be strengthened, because if once the government privatizes, when the government hands off a sector, the only thing the government needs to do is to ensure effective regulation, and that's not happening yet. It's another thing government should look into.
Maybe we should take a look at the recommendations put forward by the committee that was set up by the minister. Part of the recommendation is an audit and testing of existing equipment and improvements in the maintenance of the transmission equipment and lines. The committee called for significant investment from the government and the private sector. The committee also recommended the development of a framework and to adopt reliability-centered maintenance. Is this not, are we not, I mean, for lack of a better word, are we not rigmaroling, Prof?
Those are mundane recommendations that we made more than 20 years ago. Mundane, honestly, there's nothing extraordinary. Have been calling for power audit, system audit of the power sector. We don't even know the amount of megawatts we generate, the cost. We don't know the cost per unit of the discos. Discos will collect so much and they will remit so little. Who's auditing them? And they pay huge past salaries to their staff and management. A lot of issues. And we have a regulator there, including the Transmission Company of Nigeria that is still federal government monopoly. It is a regulated entity. Everybody that plays in the power sector space, as a company, as a firm, as an entity, they are under the jurisdictional overview or supervision of the Nigerian Electricity Regulatory Commission, NERC. So, for instance, if something goes wrong in the fiscal financial sector with the Nigerian bank, nobody talks to the federal government, nobody calls the president. Nigerians will look up to the CBN in terms of financial and monetary issues. If anything or something goes wrong in the telecoms, nobody talks about the federal government of Nigeria or the president or the governor. Nigerian looks to the direction of the NCC. The same thing for the power sector. If anything goes wrong in the power sector, it is not President Tinubu, it is not Governor Sanwo-Olu, it is not Governor Abiodun, it is not governor of a particular state. It is the regulator that should be called to question. Effective sector governance and regulation is key to achieving success in the power sector. And this is the situation all over the world.
Prof,
because government is no longer in it. Government is now a player, so we should have an independent efficient regulator, and that's not happening.
Prof, you've talked about this TCN. What about the GENCOs? Because, former Minister of Power, that's Bart Energy, had called on the federal government to resume the signing of power purchase agreements with private investors to ramp up electricity generation in Nigeria. And according to him, Nigeria currently has about 13,000 megawatts nameplate capacity, but generates only about 5,000 due to some factors that we've talked about tonight. But for him, it includes insufficient natural gas availability for the country's gas-fired plants, which accounts for 80% of national grid electricity. Is this logical in any way?
Well, Professor Bart Energy will have spoken from two different perspectives.
Okay.
One, he will have spoken from the perspective of an industry expert, which he is. We give it to him. He also have spoken from the perspective of an industry player because he has a company that is in the sector doing business. So for me, what he said was right. The government of Nigeria needs to encourage gas production. That's one. But I don't think the government should pay for gas. But gas is a competitive product. It's an internationalized commodity that is in high demand. And as I said, we need appropriate pricing of gas so that gas will be made available for the power sector. Because you don't expect gas producers to do so at a loss. Government have been the ones subsidizing through MBED, Nigeria Bulk Electricity Trading Company, or PSA.
All right.
And that will not be sustainable. Federal government will subsidize gas,
all right,
give it to the GENCOs. GENCOs will generate, give it to the DISCOs. The DISCOs will sell, they will not under remit. And they will tell Nigerians that they couldn't recover their losses.
All right.
If you recover your losses, whose fault? So a lot of things haven't been done correctly in the power sector, and we're all suffering that.
All right.
And I've dropped the table of the regulator.
All right. Prof, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Sadly, that's how far we can go on this particular conversation. Thank you so much. I've been speaking with Professor of Energy and Electricity Law, University of Lagos, Professor Yemi Oke, SEN. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Lovely.
All right. Let's go on a break, and I'll be right back. Please stay with us, everyone.